What should we eat? Is there a morally superior diet? Welcome to an original exploration of everyday moral dilemmas with philosopher Professor Clancy Martin and spiritual guide Daaji. Food. It is a necessity for our survival. But for many of us, it is much more than that. It is one of the principal pleasures of life. It brings us together. Whether it be Jesus and the apostles at the Last Supper, or a modern family going out to dine at their favorite restaurant, food has become central to social gatherings. But of late, there has also been a lot of debate about food. What is healthy? What is not? What is ethical? What is not? Let's hear from Professor Clancy Martin on the history of thought on food.
In the Western philosophical tradition, when we first start thinking about how best to feed ourselves, what to eat and what not to eat, we see it arise in the ancient Greek tradition. And the ancient Greek philosophers thought not so much about the impact of eating on the world around them, or even, to be fair, on what was being eaten, and we'll be talking about that today, but the relationship between living a good life oneself, a life that one wants to live and considers to be a praiseworthy life, and the fact that you do indeed need to eat in order to live. The most interesting thinking on this subject really comes to us from the Greek philosopher Epicurus. Epicurus was a materialist, in fact. And what we mean by materialist in this series of conversations is one who believes that all that exists is matter in motion. He thought that there was no life before we were born. He thought there was no life after we die. He thought that everything that we think of as human life exists while we are living in this ordinary place the world that we all call home. But he thought that what you ate was an important part of whether that life was going to be a good one. He made an interesting division between pleasures and pains, which he thought came to us naturally, and then within the context of pleasures and pains, he thought to live a good life was quite simple. Seek pleasures, avoid pains. But within the context of those pleasures, he thought there are some pleasures which are natural and necessary. There are some pleasures which are natural but unnecessary. And then there are some pleasures which are both unnatural and unnecessary. Now, a natural and necessary pleasure, of course, is eating, but only eating a certain amount, eating in moderation, eating as much as we need in order to produce health for the body. It's very easy for us to eat, Epicurus thought, in an unnatural or an unnecessary way. Now, for Epicurus, there's nothing, he thought, first of all, natural and necessary pleasures should absolutely be cultivated. So eating in a healthy way was just crucial to living a good life, to the possibility of having these other pleasures, to continue to live at all, and also an important part of that good life, a genuine pleasure that we should cultivate and that we can do better or worse. Doing it well means choosing our foods thoughtfully, choosing foods that do in fact make us healthier, that contribute to our feeling of well-being, contribute to our feeling of nourishment. But we can also, Epicurus thought, eat something that is unnecessary but still natural. So when it came to consumption of this kind, he listed, foods which are pleasures or drinks which are pleasures, like wine, for example, is a good example for Epicurus of an unnecessary but natural pleasure, one glass of wine or a cup of tea or something. You don't have to have it, but nevertheless it's still a pleasure. And those pleasures which he called natural but unnecessary pleasures, he thought you should keep an eye on. Indulge in them in some moderation to the degree to which they contribute to one's happiness, contribute to one's flourishing, but be careful that because they are not necessary, they may tend to slide into a different category, the category of pleasures which he thought we should avoid at all costs, which are unnatural and unnecessary pleasures. Unnatural and unnecessary pleasures are those which actually will destroy the body and destroy ultimately destroy our capacity to feel pleasure at all. So an unnatural and unnecessary pleasure, for example, which can become a pleasure for people but ought not, according to Epicurus, would be overeating or the overconsumption of alcohol or eating things which acquire a great deal of sort of connoisseurship in order to acquire a taste for, but they don't actually benefit the body at all. And even though you kind of think that you're enjoying them because you've cultivated the taste for them, they're really not good for you. And we can all think of things we can consume. So, for example, if there had been cigarette smoking in Epicurus's time, he would say, I could see how you can cultivate a pleasure for that, but it's an unnatural pleasure. It destroys the body, and it's unnecessary. You don't require it in order to go on living a good life. So that's the first thinking about how to eat well from the ancient Greeks. And I think it, to this day, provides a good sort of basic guideline for thinking about how to eat as an individual human being.
But is food merely a natural and necessary pleasure? Then what is the reason that cultures around the world have developed elaborate rituals and prayers around the act of partaking of food? Let's turn to Daaji to try and get a deeper understanding.
To my mind, the entire culinary experience is both for pleasure and out of necessity. Human trait is to engage in fulfilling our necessities with some level of embellishment, joy. It's part of having meals. Furthermore, if we partake what we consume in right frame of mind, can have a double impact on our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual needs. Here, the thought action prevails. Effect of thoughts on various neurotransmitters. While you are partaking meals with your dear ones and suddenly your spouse broaches some controversial topic where you have to defend yourself, or your teenage child brings forth some moral issues affecting them, plus the way they defend their controversial or compromised hobbies, how will you enjoy your food? Even the best food that is put in front of you by your loved ones, if your mood is not right, it will turn to ashes. Or say you are so happy and feeling loved that even the simplest of foods made by someone you love will taste just divine. So where is the pleasure? Is it not in our perception and state at the time of partaking of this meal? This is why how we eat and in what state we eat is more important. Science also talks greatly about this vagus nerve. Vagus nerve is a key. The brain can send messages to the body and the body to the brain through the vagus nerve. The entire gut intelligentsia is regulated by this vagus nerve. People often talk, especially in the scientific world, that now that gut also has its own brain. We observe that even if we eat highly nourishing foods and spend a lot of time preparing them well, if we are unable to eat in the right frame of mind, the intestines cannot absorb nourishment from the food that passes through. We build toxicity, and the inner environment of our body starts becoming prone to cultivating cells that are diseased and proliferate in such an environment. This is yet another demonstration of the mind body connection and how our thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations are interconnected. Today, most families have fallen into this habit of eating in disturbing ways. Food is consumed at all hours of a day without routine. Mobile telephones and televisions are constantly on while eating. Food prepared is done with a very limited time that is available. Hardly any of it is made from scratch or from the beginning. In a jostling, stressful world, there is little time to accord to preparing and eating food correctly. People grab a quick sandwich or run to a nearby fast food to swallow what they can before hitting their work again. Late night dinners are common, and very few families sit together to eat and spend time together. In such circumstances, we create an inner environment in our bodies as the neurophysiological and chemical processes are disturbed as a result, and food is not digested as it should. Therefore, in the ancient traditions, emphasis was given to your state of mind, how the food was prepared, how the food was served, and they classified depending upon the effects of food on our moods, not just the energy level. These foods were classified into sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. All of them classified based on their ability to affect our consciousness. That is why prayer is so important before partaking meals, so as to create a certain level of spiritual atmosphere. Perhaps equally important to me is to be grateful to all those who prepared this meal in front of us. Simply closing our eyes at the end of the meal and in the deep silence express this gratitude. Not just before beginning our meal, but at the end of the course of the meal too will help. In fact, it is more potent when we express our gratitude after taking meals. Just try it and see what happens.
While it may be relatively easy to change how we eat, what about what we eat? Cultures around the world eat a wide variety of foods. How do we make a more informed decision about what to eat?
The utilitarians spend a lot of time thinking about this. There's an Australian utilitarian philosopher by the name of Peter Singer, whose work you may want to take a look at, and there's some very nice videos also on that Peter Singer has produced that are available on YouTube. You can look them up, but I particularly recommend his writing. And Peter Singer points out that it's true that we are sentient beings, and we human beings are sentient beings, and we have pains and pleasures, and we have happiness and unhappiness. But he he also points out, why do we suppose that only our own happiness or unhappiness is relevant? He has an idea he calls speciesism. And what he means by speciesism is that when I am only considering human beings and other human beings when I'm thinking about the question of eating, maybe I am being a speciesist, like another person might be a racist who would say, hey, well, that's a little racist, isn't it? You need to extend your thinking and recognize that all people are relevant, not just one race. Well, similarly, Peter Singer says, maybe we human beings need to extend our thinking and recognize that it's not just our species that is relevant, but all of these other species are relevant too, because they are sentient, because like us, they seek happiness and avoid unhappiness. They seek pleasure and avoid pain. And if we recognize that, which is hard to avoid, that the conclusion that other non-human animals also experience pain and pleasure, well then, what we eat is going to change. Because we are going to recognize that we have to start thinking about the sentience of the beings that we eat. And we might think, okay, well, I look at a cow. I see a cow definitely experiencing pain and definitely experiencing pleasure. So cows are off the list. Now look at a dog. Okay, well, no, dogs are off the list. I look at dolphins. Okay, dolphins are off the list. But then I look at a salmon and I think, that salmon, the behavior of that salmon, it's awfully similar to that other animal that I already took off the list. I better take the salmon off the list also. And pretty soon you will wind up where a lot of us, of course, have wound up. We'll wind up as a vegetarian, saying that all non-human animals, and of course humans, are also off the list. We're just not going to eat anything that we can recognize as experiencing sentience. But there is also the fact that there are a lot of human beings on the planet. We do have respect for these human beings, and they have to be fed. They also have to be clothed. They have to interact with their environments. And sometimes these arguments tend to make it sound like every other being on the planet gets to be a natural being except for the humans, and there's something unnatural about us and our needs. And that also is not true. And that is why we may want to think about, when it comes to the principle of eating, for example, rather than forcing ourselves to live by increasingly rigid conventions that might make it extremely difficult for all of the human beings on the planet to live at all, to follow a gentler principle.
While certain environments and circumstances may necessitate the consumption of non-vegetarian food, is there any excuse for consuming non-vegetarian food when it can be easily avoided?
Yes, it's one of the most controversial topics we are entering into now. Vegetarianism. There's a lot of debate about vegetarian and non-vegetarian meals. So many diets are tossed about as the best way to eat. Let us go beyond the mere elements that make up this food, where we are supposed to have more proteins or more carbs, etc. Imagine for a moment our planet being attacked by aliens. These aliens' favorite food is human embryo. Just think for a moment, such a situation. How in the world they target millions of pregnant women, line them up and simply devour their growing fetus. Later, they tame or cultivate the human race just for the embryo. Somehow, we are also like aliens visiting this planet and behaving like them. and are doing our part in destroying so much in our strides. When we eat non-vegetarian food that has embedded the patterns at the time of slaughter, and we take those when we consume that food, we become part of those vibratory level of the animal. They lead to a certain grossness or sadness or density or anger that we accumulate energetically, vibrationally from the food. More you enjoy such food, more they become part of you because you are allowing it to happen. Animals are also sentient beings to a higher extent than plant. This reminds me of Fred Rogers, the well-known American television host, who was also a Presbyterian minister. He used to say that he could never eat a thing that had a mother. Also, I personally feel that eggs can have a heavier charge or grossness than many other non-vegetarian foods. Think of it as what must be going through the mind of the hen that lays the egg. The mother hen has the simple attachment what her eggs will hatch eventually. When we remove them from her, that longing and fear for her eggs gets latched on to that substance that we later consume. That thoughts or those thoughts affect matter is now no longer a mystical phenomena. It is proven by so many experiments conducted in labs around the world.
While beginning to recognize the effect of thought on matter, science has also brought to our attention a more tangible result of our consumer habits. Science points to the modern malaise of overconsumption. A study in America showed that if every human on Earth consumed as much of this planet's resources as the average American, we would need 7 Earth-like planets to sustain ourselves. This is all the more scandalous when dealing with the consumption of food because approximately 9 million people die of hunger or hunger-related diseases around the world every year.
We're all familiar with these arguments when it comes to the question of our consumption and our impact on the environment and global warming and future generations. Another nuance that we need to always bear in mind. The more we consume and the more thoughtlessly we consume, the more we harm the environment around us, the more difficult we make the lives of future generations. So when we are thinking in a utilitarian way, also in a Buddhist way, we recognize that harm can extend very far out from ourselves. That harm can be like, dropping a pebble in a pond and the ripples extend a long, long way, much further than we anticipate. So for this reason, again, trying as best we can to do a little less harm rather than to do more harm, trying to be increasingly thoughtful about the way in which we consume food in particular, can have a much greater impact for the good than we might suppose.
I recommend everyone to visit a village and see how food is produced, raw materials are produced, how each farmer is putting his heart and keeps his hands busy all the while until the crop is harvested and given out to the market. So much of sweat and energy is invested in producing the meal. After visiting a village, when you see how they go through an amount of trouble in producing few grains of rice, you would not waste even one grain. from your plate, because that you will be able to witness how much trouble they have taken in preparing these grains. Looking from a spiritual angle, certainly it is a fact that wasting food or consuming irresponsibly has an impact on us. Awareness or lack of awareness leading to inner harmony or discord, peace or disturbance, leads us often to optimization or lack of it. Peace literally oozes out of us, and when so many of us start living in such a manner, all with oozing out peaceful vibrations out of contentment, our impact on the planet will shift towards an authentic and responsible behavior that naturally includes the good of all beings, not just human. Each day, as we cultivate such an inner quality of life, we would automatically know when to eat, how to eat, how much to eat, and what time of the day to eat. In the most natural and simple way, simplest manner, everything starts falling into place as we are able to draw just what is required and develop an inner compass that can guide us towards good eating habits. All this inner awareness, altruism, empathy begins with a calm and relaxed, harmonious inner space that is trained by a daily practice of inner balancing.
Thank you, Daaji and Dr. Clancy Martin, for those valuable insights. That is certainly a lot of food for thought, and that is most certainly a very bad pun. Thank you also to our listeners for joining us. Do join us again for the next episode of Compass. Until then, goodbye.